All right, buckle up, everyone. And before we dive into this absolute roller coaster of a story, do me a huge favor. Smash that subscribe button. Seriously, it's free, it helps us big time, and you won't want to miss a single one of our incredible videos. Also, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear a story about standing up for yourself. Let's get into it. I never thought I'd be the guy to call off his wedding in the middle of a rehearsal dinner, yet there I was, standing in front of a room full of shocked faces, my heart pounding but my mind clearer than it had been in months. But let me back up. You need to understand how I got there and why walking away from the woman I thought I'd spend my life with became my only option. My name's Ethan, and until recently, I was engaged to a woman named Chloe. I'm 30 now, but my story with her began 5 years ago at a summer cookout. You know those moments in life that seem ordinary at first, but end up changing everything? That was one of them. Our mutual friend, Sam, had invited us both, and looking back, I can still picture her standing by the grill, red Solo cup in hand, throwing her head back with laughter at someone's joke. She had this smile, the kind that lights up more than just a face. It was genuine, reaching all the way to her eyes and somehow making everyone around her want to smile too. When Sam introduced us, we clicked instantly. She had this quick wit about her, always ready with a clever comeback or a perfectly timed joke. We spent the entire afternoon talking, lost in conversation while the party moved around us like background noise. One conversation turned into coffee the next week, which turned into dinner the following weekend. Before I knew it, we were spending every free moment together. Chloe was spontaneous in the best ways. She'd show up at my apartment with takeout from some hole-in-the-wall place she discovered, or text me random facts about whatever she was reading that day. We'd spend hours planning trips we never took, creating elaborate stories about the lives of strangers we saw in restaurants, or just sitting in comfortable silence while she worked on her laptop and I read. The years flew by, and proposing felt as natural as breathing. I spent weeks planning it. Found that little bistro where we had our first real date, arranged for our favorite local musician to be playing that night, and kept the ring box in my pocket so long I was afraid it would leave a permanent square mark on my thigh. When I finally got down on one knee, her eyes welled up before I could even finish asking the question. She said yes before I finished speaking, and the whole restaurant erupted in applause. That night, as we celebrated with champagne and called our families, I thought I knew exactly how my life would play out. Chloe and I would get married, maybe buy that little craftsman house we'd been eyeing in the historic district of Charleston, start a family. Simple. Straightforward. Perfect. But life has a way of showing you what you refuse to see. Looking back now, the signs were there from the beginning. They were small things at first, so small that brushing them off felt easier than addressing them. The way she dismissed my suggestions for our future home with a laugh and an, "Oh, Ethan, you don't know anything about real estate." The slight grimace when I talked about my working-class upbringing. The way she'd defer to her parents' opinions over mine, even on matters that should have been just between us. Her parents, David and Sharon, now there's a story in itself. When I first met them, I wrote off their behavior as just being protective of their only daughter. Sure, they were loud, opinionated, and seemed to think their way was the only right way, but what parents don't think they know best? I tried to see their constant need to be the center of attention as enthusiasm rather than entitlement. Their backhanded compliments about my simple background? I convinced myself they were just trying to understand a life different from their own. I even defended them to my mom when she gently tried to point out their less than gracious behavior. My mom, Eleanor was her name, she had this way of seeing through people while still giving them the benefit of the doubt. "Everyone has their reasons, Ethan," she'd say, "but that doesn't mean you have to accept how they treat you." Maybe if I'd listened to her then, things would have turned out differently. But I was in love, or at least I thought I was, and love has a way of painting red flags in rose-colored hues. The proposal changed things, though. It was like getting engaged gave Chloe and her parents permission to stop pretending. The mask began to slip, and what lay beneath would ultimately force me to make the hardest decision of my life. But to understand why I ended up standing in that restaurant, ending my engagement in front of everyone, you need to know about my mom. You need to know what she did for Chloe's family, how they repaid her kindness, and why disrespecting her memory became the one thing I couldn't forgive. Because sometimes the biggest acts of love aren't saying, "I do." They're walking away when someone shows you who they really are. My mom, Eleanor, was the kind of person who made the world better just by being in it. That might sound like something everyone says about their departed loved ones, but with her, it was different. She passed away 2 years ago after a brutal 3-year battle with cancer. But even during her darkest days, she never stopped thinking about others. That was just who she was, selfless to her core. I remember sitting with her during one of her chemotherapy sessions, watching her knit a baby blanket for one of the nurses who'd mentioned being pregnant. There she was, fighting for her life, and all she could talk about was making sure she finished that blanket before the baby shower. That's the thing about my mom. She didn't just help people, she invested in them, made them feel seen and valued. When it came to Chloe's family, my mom's generosity knew no bounds, though God knows they didn't deserve it. Their restaurant, this supposedly high-end place they loved to brag about, was actually on the verge of bankruptcy when my mom stepped in. I still remember the night David and Sharon showed up at our house, pride barely concealing their desperation. They needed someone to co-sign a loan. Their credit was shot, and no bank would touch them. Most people would have shown them the door. After all, David and Sharon weren't exactly known for their humility or gratitude. But my mom, she didn't hesitate. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she told me later that night as she reviewed their business plans. She didn't just co-sign that loan, she spent weeks helping them reorganize their finances, streamline their operations, and develop a sustainable business model. The restaurant survived, and you'd think that would have earned my mom some respect from them. But no. That was just the beginning of what she'd do for their family. A few months later, their industrial oven broke down, a crucial piece of equipment that would have cost them weeks of business and thousands in lost revenue. My mom wrote them a check on the spot. "Consider it an investment in your future," she said, waving away their half-hearted offers to pay her back. Then there was Jake, Chloe's older brother. He was 1 semester away from finishing college when his financial aid fell through. This was right around the time my mom's cancer was diagnosed, when she should have been focusing on her own needs and medical bills. Instead, she paid his tuition. "Education is one thing no one can take away from you," she told him, and I can still hear the sincerity in her voice. But it wasn't just the big gestures. My mom spent countless hours babysitting Jake's kid so he could study for his finals. She'd help with their bookkeeping late into the night, even when the chemo left her exhausted. She'd drive across town to deliver homemade soup when anyone in their family was sick. Small acts of kindness that added up to a lifetime of support. And how did they thank her? With polite nods and cursory acknowledgments. Never a proper thank you, never any real recognition of the difference she'd made in their lives. At the time, I tried to brush it off. My mom never did any of it for the recognition anyway. But looking back, their ingratitude was just another red flag I chose to ignore. The worst part was watching my mom fade away while they prospered. Their restaurant thrived. Jake graduated and landed a good job. And there they were, living their best lives, while my mom fought her hardest battle. During her final months, guess how many times David and Sharon visited? Just once. And they spent most of that visit talking about their restaurant's latest review in the local paper. When my mom passed away, it felt like the world lost its color. She was my North Star, my moral compass, the voice in my head reminding me to always do the right thing. Chloe was there during the funeral, of course, playing the part of the supportive fiancé. But even then, something felt off. Her condolences seemed rehearsed, her comfort mechanical. "You need to move on," she'd say, weeks after we laid my mom to rest. She wouldn't want you to be stuck in grief. Maybe she was right about that last part. My mom wouldn't want me to dwell in sadness, but she also wouldn't want me to forget. To stop standing up for what's right, to let people disrespect her memory. That's the thing about losing someone you love. Their absence teaches you what truly matters. My mom might have been gone, but the lessons she taught me, the values she instilled, those were permanent. What I didn't realize then was how those values would eventually force me to make an impossible choice. Because when you watch someone like my mom pour out endless kindness, even to those who don't appreciate it, it changes how you see the world. It raises your standards for how people should treat each other. And sometimes, honoring those standards means walking away from people who can't or won't meet them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real trouble started as the wedding plans took shape and the true colors of my future in-laws began to show through their polite veneer. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. After all, people who can't show gratitude for kindness rarely show respect for memory. The first red flag appeared during what should have been a simple conversation about wedding vows. We were sitting in our favorite coffee shop, the same one where we'd spent countless Saturday mornings planning our future together. I had just suggested including a small tribute to my mom during the ceremony. Nothing elaborate, just a moment to acknowledge her presence and spirit and the values she instilled in me. Chloe's response hit me like a splash of cold water. "Isn't that going to make people sad?" she asked, barely looking up from her phone. "Weddings are supposed to be happy occasions, Ethan." Her tone was dismissive, almost annoyed, as if I'd suggested something completely inappropriate rather than a heartfelt moment of remembrance. I tried to explain that it wasn't about making people sad. It was about honoring someone who should have been there. But Chloe just sighed, that exasperated sound I'd come to know too well. "Maybe we could just put a photo somewhere at the reception," she offered, like she was making some grand compromise. Something subtle, you know? Subtle. That word stuck with me. Why did remembering my mom need to be subtle? Why did it feel like Chloe was trying to minimize her importance? But I swallowed my objections, just like I'd been doing more and more lately. After all, wedding planning is stressful, right? Everyone gets a little tense. Then there were her parents, David and Sharon. Their behavior had always walked the line between confident and condescending, but as the wedding approached, they stopped trying to hide their true feelings about me. It started with little comments, the kind you could almost convince yourself you'd misheard. "Chloe's always had expensive taste," Sharon would say at dinner, eyeing my outfit with a barely concealed smirk. "It's good she's learning to appreciate simpler things." David was even less subtle. During a discussion about honeymoon destinations, he actually patted my shoulder and said, "Don't worry about the cost, son. We know you're not used to our lifestyle." Our lifestyle. As if their success hadn't been built on the foundation of my mother's generosity. As if their precious restaurant wouldn't be a distant memory if she hadn't stepped in to save it. But they treated me like I was some charity case their daughter had picked up, someone who needed to be educated on the finer things in life. The worst part wasn't even their behavior. It was Chloe's reaction to it, or rather, her lack of reaction. She'd sit there during these exchanges, sometimes even joining in with a little laugh or an apologetic shrug in my direction. When I'd bring it up later, she'd wave it off. "Oh, that's just how they are," she'd say. "You're being too sensitive." Too sensitive. I heard that phrase a lot during those months. Too sensitive about the way they dismissed my family's traditions. Too sensitive about their jokes about my humble background. Too sensitive about their constant reminders that I was marrying up in the world. The planning sessions for the wedding became exercises in humiliation. Sharon took charge of everything, steamrolling over any suggestions I made with a patronizing smile. "Oh, Ethan," she'd say, "leave these decisions to us. We know what's best." And Chloe, She'd just sit there, nodding along, occasionally throwing me a sympathetic glance that did nothing to ease the sting. Even the guest list became a battlefield. When I submitted my list of family and friends, Sharon reviewed it like she was checking for spelling errors in a child's homework. "Well," she said, tapping her pen against the paper, "we'll have to be selective. The venue is quite exclusive, you understand." Meanwhile, their side of the guest list continued to grow daily, filled with business associates and social connections I'd never even heard of. Then came the day David cornered me at their house during a Sunday brunch. He pulled me aside, ostensibly to show me his wine collection, but really to have what he called a man-to-man talk. "Look, Ethan," he said, swirling his overpriced Cabernet, "we know you're trying your best to fit in with our circle, and we appreciate that. Just remember, Chloe is used to a certain standard of living." I stood there, gripping my own glass so tight I thought it might shatter, as he continued his thinly veiled warning about maintaining their lifestyle. It wasn't about love or happiness or building a life together. It was about their image, their status, their precious social standing. That night, I tried one last time to talk to Chloe about how her parents were treating me. We were in her car, driving home from brunch, when I brought up David's little chat. Instead of supporting me or even acknowledging the problem, she exploded. "Why can't you just be grateful?" she demanded. "They're trying to include you in our world and all you do is complain." Our world. Those two words echoed in my head, crystallizing everything that had been nagging at me. In their minds, there would always be their world and my world. Separate, unequal, with me forever trying to prove I belonged in theirs. But the real gut punch, the moment that should have made me call everything off right then, was yet to come. It would take a rehearsal dinner, a room full of witnesses, and an unforgivable display of disrespect to finally open my eyes to what had been right in front of me all along. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Grand Ballroom at the Plaza, one of those impossibly fancy restaurants where the menu doesn't list prices and the waiters judge you by your wine selection. David and Sharon had insisted on hosting it there, making sure everyone knew about their connections that secured the exclusive venue. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same restaurant they'd nearly lost before my mom stepped in to save it. From the moment I walked in, something felt off. The elegant chandeliers cast shadows that seemed too harsh, the white tablecloths too pristine, like they were waiting to catch any mistake I might make. As I looked around the room, the disparity became clear. The place was packed with Chloe's family, her parents' business associates, and social connections I'd never met. My side of the room was practically empty, save for my dad, sister, and a handful of close friends. "We had to fill the room somehow," Chloe had said when I questioned the guest list. "Your family's small, Ethan. It would have looked awkward to have empty tables." She'd said it so casually, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. That should have been my cue to walk out right then. But I was still trying to be the bigger person, still trying to make this work. David was in his element, standing by the entrance like some sort of makeshift maitre d', shaking hands and accepting congratulations, as if he were the one getting married. Sharon fluttered around the room, directing staff and guests with equal authority, occasionally throwing glances my way as if to make sure I wasn't embarrassing them somehow. The dinner itself was a masterclass in passive-aggressive behavior. Every course came with a commentary from Sharon about how different this must be from what you were used to. "The chef trained in Paris," she announced, looking pointedly at me, "though I'm sure the diners at your local spots are lovely too." But it was the speeches that turned everything from uncomfortable to unbearable. David stood up first, grabbing the microphone like he was about to deliver a keynote address. "Welcome, everyone," he boomed, his voice carrying that false warmth I'd come to know too well. "Tonight, we're here to celebrate the union of our precious Chloe and Ethan." The pause before my name wasn't subtle. nor was it meant to be. What followed was less a toast and more a thinly veiled roast. Chloe's always been our star, he continued, always known exactly what she wanted in life. And while Ethan might not be what we initially envisioned, he let the sentence hang, drawing scattered chuckles from his side of the room. I could feel my dad tensing up beside me, could see my sister's knuckles turning white around her wine glass. But it was Chloe's reaction that hurt the most. She was smiling. Actually smiling, like her father's words were somehow charming rather than cruel. Then Sharon took the microphone and things went from bad to worse. "We're so happy to welcome Ethan into our family," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It'll be nice to finally have someone who doesn't mind getting their hands dirty." More laughter, more pointed looks. But they weren't done. Just when I thought they couldn't sink any lower, David stood up again, clinking his glass for one final toast. "Before we wrap up," he said, "I want to acknowledge someone who's no longer with us. Ethan's mother, Eleanor." My heart stopped. In that moment, I knew whatever came next would change everything. "Eleanor was one of a kind," David continued, his tone making it clear this wasn't going to be a tribute. "She had quite the habit of inserting herself into situations, didn't she? Always had an opinion about how things should be done." Sharon chimed in from her seat. "Oh, she definitely had strong opinions. Remember how she always insisted on helping us even when we didn't ask?" The room had gone quiet. Too quiet, but David pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "But in all seriousness, Eleanor was a generous woman. Sometimes too generous, if I'm being honest." He winked at his friends like they were all in on some private joke. "Let's hope Ethan doesn't inherit her enthusiasm for taking charge. We wouldn't want him meddling too much, right?" I sat there, frozen, as they laughed about my mother's memory. The woman who had saved their business, who had helped their son finish college, who had given everything she had to help others. And they were mocking her at what was supposed to be a celebration of family coming together. But what broke me wasn't their words. It was Chloe's laughter, light and casual, as if they were sharing some amusing anecdote rather than desecrating the memory of someone I loved. She reached over and patted my hand, whispering, "They're just joking, Ethan. Don't be so serious." In that moment, something inside me snapped. The careful restraint I'd been maintaining for months, the polite silence I kept in the face of their constant disrespect, it all crumbled away. I looked around the room at the faces of these people who thought they were so much better than my mom, at my supposed fiancé who couldn't even defend her memory, and I knew what I had to do. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The time for staying quiet was over. The time for being polite had passed. What happened next would change everything, and I was ready for it. The silence that fell over the room when I stood up was absolute. Even the kitchen staff stopped moving, frozen in place like extras in a paused movie. I could feel every eye on me, could sense the collective intake of breath as people waited to see what I would do. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, my voice low but carrying clearly across the hushed room. I was looking directly at Sharon, who had the audacity to appear confused, as if she couldn't possibly understand why I might be upset. "Ethan," David said, his tone condescending as ever, "sit down. You're making a scene." "A scene?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about making a scene? How about mocking my dead mother at what's supposed to be a family celebration?" Chloe tugged at my sleeve, hissing, "Ethan, stop." "You're embarrassing me." That's when everything crystallized. 5 years of relationship, countless moments of swallowing my pride, endless attempts to fit into their world, and all Chloe cared about was being embarrassed. "No," I said, gently but firmly removing her hand from my sleeve. "I'm done stopping. I'm done being quiet, and I'm done pretending this is okay." I turned to address the whole room, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "You all just sat here and listened to them mock my mother. The same woman who saved their restaurant when no one else would help. The same woman who paid for their son's college tuition. The same woman who spent her final years helping them build the very success they're so proud of. David started to stand, his face reddening. Now listen here. No, you listen, I cut him off. You've done enough talking tonight. My mother was worth 10 of you. She helped people without expecting anything in return. She gave everything she had to make others' lives better. And this is how you honor her memory? By turning her into a punchline? I looked at Chloe, who was staring at her plate, her face a mix of embarrassment and anger. And you? I said softly. You just sat there and laughed like it was funny. Like it was okay. Taking a deep breath, I made the announcement that would change everything. The wedding is off. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Sharon's hand flew to her chest in theatrical shock. David's face turned an even deeper shade of red, but I wasn't done. I won't spend my life with someone who can't respect my mother's memory. I won't join a family that treats kindness like a weakness and generosity like a joke. I deserve better than this. My mom taught me that much. With that, I walked out, head held high despite the chaos erupting behind me. My dad and sister followed immediately, and I could hear my few friends getting up to leave as well. In the parking lot, my dad put his hand on my shoulder. Your mom would be proud, he said simply. But the story wasn't over. The next morning, the real fallout began. My phone exploded with messages. Chloe's ranged from angry to pleading. How could you do this to me? Followed by, please, we can work this out. David's were predictably threatening. You'll regret this, you ungrateful punk. Sharon's attempted to play the victim. After everything we've done for you. I ignored them all. Chloe showed up at my apartment the next day, still wearing her dress from the rehearsal dinner, mascara stained under her eyes. She begged me to reconsider, promised she'd talk to her parents, swore things would be different. It's not just about last night, I told her. It's about who you are, who they are, who I'd have to become to fit into your world. She left crying, but I felt nothing but relief. The weight of pretending, of trying to be someone I wasn't, had finally lifted. But the real gut punch came a few days later. I was going through my mom's old keepsake box, something I did when I needed to feel close to her. Inside was, or should have been, a family locket passed down through generations. But it was gone. A sick feeling settled in my stomach as I remembered Chloe's last visit to drop off the engagement ring. She'd asked to use the bathroom, had been gone longer than necessary. When confronted, she admitted to taking it, claiming she just wanted to feel close to me. The locket was at her parents' house for safekeeping, she said, like that made it better. The final confrontation at her parents' house to retrieve the locket was mercifully brief. As I took back this piece of my family history, I realized how close I'd come to losing myself in their world. My mom's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. In the weeks that followed, I blocked their numbers, deleted their messages, and began the process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. Letting go of a 5-year relationship never is. But every time I doubted my decision, I'd remember my mom's words. Your integrity is worth more than anyone's approval. The hardest part wasn't calling off the wedding or even facing the gossip that followed. The hardest part was accepting that I'd almost married someone who couldn't see the value in kindness, who couldn't understand that true class has nothing to do with money and everything to do with how you treat people. But in the end, that's exactly why I had to walk away. Because my mom didn't just teach me about generosity and kindness. She taught me about self-respect. She taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no to something that doesn't honor your values. Looking at my mom's locket now, safely back where it belongs, I know I made the right choice. Love isn't just about grand gestures or fancy rehearsal dinners. It's about respect, gratitude, and honoring the memories of those who shaped us. My mom might not have lived to see me almost get married, but her legacy lived on in the courage it took to walk away. And in the end, that's the kind of love story worth telling. Not one about wedding bells and white dresses, but one about standing up for what's right, honoring those we've lost, and remembering that some things are worth more than social status or approval. They say every cloud has a silver lining. In my case, it took a rehearsal dinner from hell to show me what my mom had been trying to teach me all along. That true character isn't about where you come from or how much money you have. It's about how you treat people, especially those who can no longer speak for themselves. And sometimes the greatest act of love isn't saying, "I do." Sometimes it's having the courage to say, "I don't," when faced with people who don't share your values. That's the lesson I'll carry forward, along with my mom's memory, as I move on to whatever comes next. Because in the end, she was right. Education is something no one can take away from you. And this, painful as it was, turned out to be the most important education of all. What do you think of Ethan's decision? Have you ever had to walk away from a situation that didn't align with your values? Share your thoughts in the comments below.